The clip was 20 seconds long and I watched it about 40 times before I let myself understand what I was looking at. 5:19 in the morning, the 11th of October, 2016. My trail camera was strapped to the corner post of the old dairy barn and pointed at my calving lot, because I'd lost 2 calves that summer and I needed a picture of a wolf. Dead center of the frame, there's a gate and some froze mud. The thing I'm talking about is over in the left edge of the shot, back by the silo, half out of frame, and it is walking on 2 legs. That is not the part that put me on the kitchen floor. People always figure the sighting is the story. The sighting is not the story. The part that got me came 20 minutes later, when I quit rewinding that clip and went back through the whole card with a pencil and a feed store notebook and wrote down the timestamp off every video on it. 29 days on that card. 29 nights it came out of my silo between 8 and 11. 29 mornings it went back in before it got light. It never missed. It was not crossing my place. It lived there. Before we get into it, let me know where you're watching from and if you've had an encounter like this. My name is Howard Wenzel. I run beef cows 11 miles northeast of Withee, in Clark County, Wisconsin, between Owen and the Taylor County line where the farms give out and the county forest starts. 60 years old that fall. My grandfather Emil put the first 80 together in 1919. My dad Clifford held it through every year. Everybody around him quit, and it's been mine since Dad died in 2003. 460 acres. Hay ground, a little oats some years, 40 pair of black cows, and whatever calves they give me. That's the whole operation. You have to understand the country or none of the rest works. If you've heard of Clark County, you've heard of it as dairy. More milk cows than people. And that's been true 100 years. What you have not heard is what's behind the barns. This is the Cutover. In the 1880s and 90s, the timber outfits took every white pine standing and left 2 million acres of stumps from here to Lake Superior. The land companies bought it cheap, printed brochures with pictures of cabbages on them, and sold that stumpland to Germans and Poles and Bohemians coming off the boat at $6 an acre. My grandfather was one of them. Most of them didn't make it, and it wasn't their fault. Half that ground was never farm ground. By the 30s, the taxes went unpaid, and the counties took it back. County forests, 2.5 million acres in this state. Every acre of it ground a family walked away from. And Clark County has the biggest block going. Nobody bulldozed any of it. Nobody had money to bulldoze anything in 1934. They just stopped. There are more empty buildings out here than there are people. I never counted them. Hazel Brunner counted them. I'll get to Hazel. My own yard has 4 buildings on it. The house, which Emil put up in 1931, and I have been fixing ever since. The pole shed, where the tractors live. The old dairy barn, which has not held a milk cow since June of 1986. And the silo, concrete stave. 16 foot across, 50 foot tall. Emil built it in 1954 with his brother and 2 neighbors, and a rented hoist. It's the tallest thing for 4 miles in any direction, and you can see it from the county trunk. A stave is a chunk of precast concrete 10 inches wide and 30 inches tall. You interlock them like a puzzle and run galvanized steel hoops around the outside and pull them tight with lugs. The concrete doesn't hold a silo up. The steel does. Every hoop is squeezing that thing into a circle, and the day the steel quits, the concrete is a stack of blocks. There's a chute running up the north face with a ladder inside it and a column of little square doors going to the roof. 20 inches by 30. When you feed a silo down over a winter, you pull those doors out one at a time as the silage drops away under you. And you leave them out, because you want them out when you fill again. So the top 40 foot of my silo is a stack of open square holes and has been my whole adult life. I have looked at them every day since I was 30. The way you look at a doorknob. In March of 1986, my dad drove into Neilsville to the ASCS office and put in a bid on the whole herd buyout. The government was paying dairymen to send every cow and heifer and calf they owned to slaughter and stay out of milk for 5 years, and about 15,000 farms took that deal. Up here in the marginal country, a lot more of us took it than they did down in the good ground. His bid got taken. The cows went on a truck the second week of June, and my dad never milked another cow, and neither did I. The silo got filled for the last time in the fall of 1985. We fed it out over that winter. It has been empty for 30 years. Somewhere around the time Dad died, the bottom 2 hoops rusted through. That's normal, and I don't want you thinking I let something go a decent farmer wouldn't. The bottom hoops carry the most load and sit in the most water and always fail first. When they let go, the staves have got nothing squeezing them into a circle anymore, and a few of them walk out. 8 of them came out of the north side of the base. 10 inches wide, 30 inches tall, 8 of them, which leaves you a hole about 2.5 feet across and up past my belt buckle. I never fixed it. Why would I? There was nothing in there to keep in and nothing out here I wanted to keep out. I mowed around that hole for 13 years, and my grandkids played tag in that yard. The first thing that went wrong was the cows. And it went wrong so slow and so quiet that I could not put a month on it if you paid me. Cattle are not smart. They are not stupid either. And the one thing a cow is truly good at is knowing where she does not want to be. She uses every square foot of her pasture, shade when it's hot, high ground when the flies are bad, water and back. You watch that 40 years and quit seeing it. You'd notice if it stopped.
Quick thing before we move on. I have this book coming out. It's called the Dogman Codex. It's a compilation of all my research and findings. Been working on it for a long time. So if you want to check that out, links down below. Now let's get you back to the video.
It stopped. Somewhere in that summer, my pairs quit using the northeast corner of the home pasture. That corner is the best corner. Only real shade out there, big popple, and 2 bur oaks on a sand ridge, and a seep at the bottom that runs cold all summer. In July, with the heat and the deer flies working, 40 cows ought to be piled in that shade by 10 in the morning. Instead, they were out in the sun at the south fence, packed in a knot you couldn't have walked into, heads up, looking north. At the shade they wouldn't go into, from the road that looks like nothing. It looks like cows. I drove past it 100 times before it landed on me, and when it landed, my first thought was a ground nest of hornets, or a dead deer stinking, or hot wire ticking on a wet branch where they didn't care for the snap. So I walked it, fence to fence, on a Sunday in July. No nest, no carcass. Tester read 6,000 volts. Nothing up there but shade and grass, and that seep running cold out of the sand. I stood in that corner 10 minutes trying to see what a cow saw, and I could not see it. And 40 head of black cows watched me walk back out like I was a fool. The second thing was the smell. And the smell is the one that shames me, because I had an answer ready for it, and the answer was standing right there. And I never questioned it one time. There's a corner of my yard between the barn and the silo where it stinks. It had stunk a while, sour and sweet at once. And under it, a thing turned, the way a deer smells on about the 3rd day, with wet dog laid over the top. Here's why that went nowhere. Old silos stink. A stave silo that held corn silage 30 years has a rind of rotten feed baked into the bottom 2 foot of it that will never quit. Butyric acid, same as makes rancid butter smell like rancid butter, and on a still August day you can smell my grandfather's silage from 1985 clear out at the mailbox. So, when that corner smelled like a dead thing in a wet basement, I said, "That's the silo." And then I said, "And there's a coon dead in the barn wall again," because there had been twice in 10 years. That's it. 4 seconds maybe, sitting up on the tractor with a bale on the spear, and then I went and did whatever I was going to do that day. I have had 9 winters to sit with that. The third thing was the yard light, and I only have the date on that one because I write everything on the calendar in the shop. June 2nd. The mercury vapor light on the pole between the house and the barn, the one that kicks on at dusk and burns till daylight, and has burned every night of my life, was dead. Not flickering, dead. And when I got the ladder up there, the glass was gone. Not busted with a hole through it. Gone. The whole envelope, and the pieces were down in the grass. I figured a rock. I'd been mowing along that pole the week before, And a rock off a deck mower will do 90 miles an hour, and I have taken out a truck window that way. I got a bulb in Owen and put it in and never thought about it again. That light is 22 foot up a treated pole. I'll let you do what you want with that. I want to tell you about the dog now, and I want it here, in the middle, where it belongs. We had a dog named Meg. Australian Shepherd crossed onto something with more bone in it. Black and white. One blue eye. She was Sharon's, really, but she worked cows for me better than a hired man and for nothing. And she lived outside her whole life and never once wanted in. In November of 2014, she didn't come to the door in the morning. That's all there was to it. I called her all day and drove the town road for a week and looked in every culvert on the section. Sharon put it up on the township Facebook page, and a woman over by Longwood called about a black and white dog dead in a ditch, and I drove down there, and it was a healer, and it wasn't her. You lose farm dogs. They get on the blacktop. They get in with the wrong wolf. They get old and go off and lay down. I told Sharon she got hit and dragged off, and I believed it when I said it. That was 2 years before any of the rest of this, and I put it in the ground and left it there. Just remember her. That's all I'm asking. The calves are what finally made me pick up the phone. I calve in April, which is the only window I've got between the mud and the flies. By July, they're out on grass with their mothers at 150, 180 pounds. And they're fast, and they stay tight to the cow. Losing one in July is not normal. Losing two is not normal at all. The first one I never found. You count 68, and a week later, you count 67, and you count again 3 times over 3 days, and then you accept it, and write it in the book, and tell yourself, he got in the pond, or through the fence into the county forest. That's $1,100 walking off. You go on. The second one I found, and I found it on the 8th of August, and I found it on top of my bale stack. I stack round bales 3 high in the yard between the barn and the pasture gate. A 5x6 round bale is 5 foot tall and weighs 1,200 pounds. You get up there with a loader, or you don't get up there. What was left of that calf was laying in the trough between 2 bales on the second course, 8, 9 foot up. I won't walk you through what it looked like. It was August, and it had been there long enough. Hide and a rib cage and a lot less of everything else than there should have been, and it was clean, not torn all over the yard. Clean, and tucked into that trough between 2 bales, the way you'd set a toolbox down somewhere you meant to come back to. A wolf does not do that. I know what you're thinking, and I thought it first, and I thought it for 6 weeks. We have wolves. There were 25 left in all of Wisconsin in 1980, and now there's better than 1,000. And a good many of them live in that county forest that starts at my back fence. I have watched a pair cross the town road in front of the truck at 4 in the afternoon like they had the right of way, which up here, legally, they about do. So the word wolf was in my mouth before I got off the loader. But wolves don't cache in a bale stack. A wolf eats where it kills and comes back to it on the ground. A wolf could not have got that calf 10 foot in the air if you gave it a ladder and a week to think it over. I called it in anyway. You call USDA Wildlife Services, which surprises people who don't farm. The DNR doesn't come. The DNR contracts it out. If the federal man verifies the kill as wolf, you get a form and the DNR cuts you a check. If he doesn't verify it, you get nothing. And in 2016, a federal judge had wolves back on the endangered list, which meant the man could look at your dead calf and write it down and then legally could not do one thing about the animal that did it. He could give you flagging to string on your fence. That was the tool he had. Ribbon. I'm telling you the ground rules because the ground rules are why I wound up in a kitchen in October with a laptop instead of doing what my grandfather would have done, which is settle it himself and never mention it. The man who came out was named Mark Ziegler, wildlife specialist, USDA, out of the North Office. Late 40s, khaki shirt, government pickup with a dog box on it. Polite, quiet, never wasted a word on me the whole time he was there. And 9 years on, I'll say I have never misjudged a man worse. I figured him for a form filler. He was not. He looked at that bale stack a long time before he touched anything. Then he got a stepladder out of the truck. His own stepladder, which tells you he'd needed one before. and went up and worked on that calf 20 minutes. He measured a bite spread with a caliper 3 times. He wrote in a notebook with the pages gone soft from living out in the weather. Then he came down and walked the stack in a circle, and then walked out 50 foot and walked another circle around that, looking down the whole way, and I let him, because I have hired enough men to know when to shut up. He asked me how the calf got up there. I said, "That's what I called you about." He said it flat, no smile, and he wrote something down. Then he asked how many I was missing, and I said, "This makes 2. He asked, "Did I find the first one?" I said, "No." He shut the notebook on that one. He didn't have to tell me, because I'd read it on the DNR page at midnight like a fool. No carcass, no claim. Half the losses in this state never get counted, because you cannot write a government check on a man's word about a cow that isn't there. He said he could not verify wolf on the one I did have. I asked him what he could verify. He said he'd write it up as canid, undetermined. I asked him what that meant on a form. He said it meant undetermined. I said, "So I get nothing?" He said, "On this one, probably nothing." And then he said the only other thing he said to me that day that mattered, and he said it standing at the door of his truck, with the door open and one boot up on the running board, not looking at me, looking past me at the yard. He said, "How long has that silo been open at the bottom?" I said, "What?" He said, "The base. How long's it been open?" I said, 14 years. Since my dad died." And he stood there another second and he said, "Huh." And he got in the truck and he pulled the door shut and he went down my driveway and out onto the county trunk, and I never saw him again. He never came back and he never called. The letter came from the DNR 11 days later. 1 page. The loss could not be verified as wolf depredation. No reimbursement would be issued. And if I had further concerns, I could contact my area wildlife biologist. I put it in the kitchen drawer with the rest of the mail I'm never going to answer. I have thought about that man about once a week for 9 years. He knew. He stood in my yard on the 10th of August and looked at a hole in the bottom of a concrete silo and knew what he was looking at. And he asked one question to find out how bad it was, and when I said 14 years, he said, "Huh," and left. I've had 9 years to work out what he was doing, walking those 2 circles around my bale stack looking at the ground. And I'd bet the farm on it. He was looking for track going away. There wasn't any going away. There was only track going toward. I found the tracks 11 days after Ziegler left. And I found them because I went looking, which is a thing I had never done before in my life. Back of my north line, the county forest starts and does not stop. Walk east from my back fence, and if you know the crossings, you come out in Taylor County a day later. And if you don't come out. Black spruce and tamarack in the low ground, popple on the rises. And the low ground is sphagnum laid down 6 and 8 feet deep on clay. That's why nobody has ever proved a word of this. Moss does not take a track. You step in it, and it closes. You can walk a bull moose across a spruce bog and come back an hour later, and there's nothing but wet moss. There is no ground in that whole county forest that will hold a footprint for 1 hour, except the grade. There's a railroad grade runs through the back of that forest, put in by a logging outfit in 1890-something to haul pine to the Black River, and abandoned before my grandfather ever saw this county. They pulled the rails and ties for scrap 100 years ago, and what's left is a bank of fill 3 foot up out of the swamp, 12 foot wide, running straight as a chalk line for 9 miles. In August, it's bare gravel and hardpan with sand blown across the low spots. It is the only walkable ground for 6 miles in any direction. Every deer uses it. Every bear. Every wolf. It is the only place out there that is not a bog, and that has been true since before anybody alive was born. That grade comes off the corner of my north line about 400 yards from my back fence. And where it comes off, on a sand patch about the size of a kitchen table, I found 2 prints, just 2, not a trail of them, 2. And then the sand ended, and the hardpan started, and there was nothing. First thing I want to say about them is they looked like a dog. If you'd shown me one on a phone, I'd have said big dog, and said it fast. 4 toes. A big pad. Claw marks out front of every toe. That's a canine foot and there's no arguing it. Two things were wrong with it. The size. I laid my hand in the first one, spread, and my hand did not fill it. I wear an extra large glove. That print was 11 inches long, and I know because I walked back to the shop and got a tape and came back, and I stood there in the sun with a Stanley tape hooked on the edge of a footprint in the sand, feeling like a crazy man. The second thing was worse, and it took a minute to see. There was a heel in it. A dog does not put a heel down. A dog walks on his toes. His hock, the joint you think is his knee, that's his heel, and it rides up in the air and never touches dirt in his whole life. Look at your own dog. He walks on his fingers. Behind those 4 toes and that pad there was a second impression, a long one, deeper at the back than the front, running back another 4 inches and dug in at the end where weight came down. Something was walking on that foot flat. Something was putting a heel down on a dog's foot. I measured the step between the 2 prints too, because by then I was past being embarrassed. 4'2", front of one to front of the other. I walked back and forth on that grade and measured my own. Mine is 30 inches. I'm 5'11". Now I have to tell you about Elkhorn, because everybody watching this is already there. Every person in this state knows about the Elkhorn business. Bray Road, Walworth County. The late 80s. The thing on the county trunk on 2 legs that got itself in the newspaper and then onto a t-shirt. That's 180 miles from my mailbox, and it might as well be Ohio for all it has to do with up here. When it crossed my mind, months later, at 2 in the morning, it made me angry, because the joke had used the thing up. The shirt meant that no matter what I ever said, the first thing out of anybody's mouth was going to be the shirt. That's how it protects itself out here. It doesn't have to hide. It's already been made ridiculous. I bought the camera on the 12th of September at the Fleet Farm in Marshfield. A Browning, the small green one, the Strike Force, $130 and change, and I felt like a jackass carrying it up to the register. 60 years old, buying a deer hunter's toy because I couldn't tell a government man where my calves went. Here's the only lucky thing in this whole account. I did not point it at the silo. It never once crossed my mind. Why would it? The silo was a silo. I strapped that camera to the corner post of the barn about 7 foot up and turned it southwest at the calving lot gate, because that's where a wolf comes through. And the gate and the lot filled the frame, and the silo base sat over at the far left edge of the shot where I never looked. I set it on video. 20-second clips. The man in the store said video was better for identifying an animal, and he was thinking about deer and antler points, and he was right for entirely the wrong reason. I pulled the card on the 11th of October and sat down at the kitchen table with the laptop Michelle had set up for us, and Sharon was in Neilsville at her sister's, and I started clicking. If you've never done this, it is the most boring thing a man can do indoors. Cow, cow, wind. A coon on the gate at 9 at night. Rain at 2 in the morning, setting it off 11 times running. Cow. A deer at the fence line. Wind. I was going fast, clicking through them the way you flip past channels. 2 seconds a clip, looking dead center at that gate for a gray shape. And then a clip came up where every cow in the lot was standing at the far fence with her head up, looking at the barn. That stopped me, because I'd seen it before, in July, in the pasture, from the road. And I hadn't known what I was looking at then either. I let it run. Nothing came through the gate. Nothing happened in the middle of the frame at all. The cows stood there in the infrared with their eyes lit up white, 40 head, packed at the far fence with their heads up, and down at the bottom left corner of the frame, at the very edge, in the black by the silo, there was one white star. One. I sat and looked at that and thought, deer. A deer's eye lights up in infrared like a dime, and one eye means it's turned. An animal standing at an angle shows you one eye. I have looked at 1,000 pictures of deer at night, and they are always doing something with their heads. So I waited for the second one. It never came. And the one that was there did not move for 11 seconds. And then the whole thing rose. Not the head. Not the animal turning. The light itself went up, from a foot off the ground to about 6 foot in one movement, smooth, no bob in it, straight up and level like a man standing off a bucket. And it stopped. And then it came out of the black into the edge of the camera's infrared, and I saw the rest of it. And my coffee went over on the floor, and I did not notice for a half hour. I got maybe 18 inches of it in the shot. It was mostly out of frame. What was in frame was legs and hips and part of a back. The near leg had an extra joint in it, and the joint bent the wrong way. A cow has a hock. A dog has a hock. Every four-legged thing you have ever seen has a hock in the back leg, and it points backward. That's how the world is built. What is not built that way is a thing standing straight up on two back legs, upright, tall as a man, with a hock in the middle of each one, pointing backwards behind it, knee up high, tucked in where a man's hip is, then the hock, then a long piece of leg to the ground, standing on the front half of the foot with the heel high, except when it takes a step. Then the heel comes down, and that is when it went through me, sitting in my own kitchen at 4 in the afternoon with the sun still up, that I had measured that 2 months before, with a Stanley tape, on a railroad grade, and I wrote it in a notebook and went and had lunch. It took 2 steps, and it was gone off the left of the frame, and the clip ended. And the still that comes up at the end was the cows at the far fence with their heads up. 20 seconds. I watched it 40 times. That is not a figure of speech. I clicked it back and ran it again and dragged the little bar back a half second at a time until the light outside the kitchen window changed. And here's the part nobody talks about, because everybody who ever told you one of these got one look and it was gone. I could look as long as I wanted. That's worse. A man who sees one in his headlights gets a second and a half, and then the rest of his life to argue himself out of it. And I have envied those men. I had it on a computer. I could go back forever, and it never got fuzzier, and it never turned into a bear. And every time I dragged that bar to the start, that leg bent the wrong way again, and the heel came down again, exactly the same. And then, sometime in there, I quit watching that clip and did the thing that ended my life as I'd had it. I went and got a pencil and the feed store notebook off the top of the refrigerator. And I started at the first clip on the card. And I wrote down the date and the time and what was in it. 400 and some clips. And it took me 2 hours. Sharon called at 6 and I told her I was busy and hung up on her, which I have done twice in 48 years of marriage, and both times were that week. Here is what was in that notebook when I finished. 29 days. September 13th. Out at 9:41 at night. Back in at 5:02 in the morning. September 14th. Out at 8:56. In at 5:11. On and on and on and on. Down the page, and then over to the next page. And it never broke. Out between 8 and 11 at night. Back in between 4:30 and 5:30 in the morning. 29 nights running. It didn't skip when it rained on the 26th, and it didn't skip when we had that hard freeze the first week of October. I sat and looked at 2 pages of a feed store notebook in my own handwriting, because a thing that walks across your place is a thing that walks across your place. That's a fright. And then it's a story you don't tell. A thing that leaves at 9 and comes home at 5 every day for 29 days is not crossing your place. It's keeping hours. It's got a routine, a place it sleeps and a place it works, and a time it gets up and a time it comes home. And the place it sleeps is a 50-foot concrete tower my grandfather built in 1954, so his cows would eat in the winter, standing 310 feet from the chair I was sitting in. And then I did one more thing, and I wish to God I had not, because I could have gone the rest of that night without it. I flipped back to the last page. The last clip on that card was from that morning. October the 11th. 5:19. Going in. Nothing on the card after that. Nothing all day. I looked at the clock on the stove. 6:40 in the evening, and the sun had gone down at 6:22, and the yard was already blue outside my window. It had not come out yet. It was in there right now. I did not go outside. I've listened to enough of these to know how it's supposed to go. The man gets a light and walks out there and puts his head in the hole. and everybody gets the part they came for. I sat in a chair in my own kitchen. The reason is not that I was scared, although I want to be clear that I was. The reason is that I did the arithmetic. It was 6:40 at night. The notebook was open on the table, and the notebook said between 8 and 11. So on the short end, I had an hour and 20 minutes. And after that, once it went, I had until 4:30 in the morning with an empty silo out there, and nothing in it but dust. You understand what that means. For 29 nights, and I'd guess a great deal longer, I could have walked out to that silo at midnight and looked at where it slept and been back in the house in 4 minutes. I never did, and now I never will. And that window closed on me without anybody telling me, so I did the only thing left. I shut the kitchen light off and pulled a chair up to the window over the sink and got Dad's rifle out of the closet and laid it across my knees and sat there in the dark at 10 minutes to 7 waiting to watch it leave my own yard. Out that window I've got the pole shed on the left and past it the barn, and the barn runs east and west and it's 110 foot long. The calving lot hangs off the south side, facing me. The silo stands at the far end, and on the far side, north, there is 110 foot of dairy barn between my kitchen window and the base of that silo. And in 60 years, it had never once occurred to me that this was a problem. The yard light was burning. The bulb I put in it in June was still going, and it threw a circle 60 foot across, and inside that circle I could see the yard and half the calving lot and the cows lined up on the bunk. Outside it there was nothing, so I could not see the silo. I could not see one thing on the north side. What I had was 40 cows standing in the light. At 14 minutes after 9, and I know because I had the clock on the stove in the corner of my eye the whole time, every cow in that lot quit the bunk at once and put her head up. Not one and then another. At once, 40 head. And then they turned, slow, together, heads swinging left to right, the way cattle track a truck coming up the drive. A quarter turn over 20 seconds or so, and they held there looking at the corner of the barn, and then dropped their heads and went back to eating. I never saw a thing. I never heard a thing. I sat 40 foot from it with a rifle across my lap and a bulb burning while it walked out of my yard. And the only proof I have is that 40 animals turned their heads. I have gone over those 20 seconds more than any other 20 seconds of my life. Look at what's in them. They were not scared. A scared cow does not stand and watch. She puts a fence between her and it. And I had a video from September of that exact lot doing exactly that, so I know they had it in them. That night they just looked. Head up, watch it go. Back to the bunk. You know what that is? That's the school bus. That's the mailman. That's a thing that goes by at the same time every night and has gone by so long it turned into furniture. 40 animals that cannot smell a wolf without hitting the far fence stood in a lit yard and watched it walk past. And it was the dullest part of their day. They knew. They'd known all summer. The only new thing in that yard on the 11th of October was me sitting in a window finding out. Between the 11th of October and the 25th of October, I did nothing. 14 days. I want to walk you through what nothing looks like, because a man in this spot has got about 4 choices, and every one of them costs him everything. Sell the cows. That's the smart one. Ship the herd in November when they're worth something, and then it's a hay farm and I'm not out there at 4 in the morning in April with a flashlight and a chain. And then what? Then I'm 60. Still living in the house. The silo still standing 40 rod from my bedroom window. And I have taken the only thing off the place that was telling me where it was. Those cows were an instrument. I worked that out on the 12th of October. Or go public. Put it on the internet. Call the paper in Marshfield. Get somebody out here with a camera. I know that's what half of you would say I should have done. So here's what happens. I become Elkhorn. I'm a man with a silo and a story. And inside a month, I'm a joke on a placemat and it never comes off. Not off me, not off my kids, not off the 460 acres. Michelle was 15 that fall. I was not handing that girl a last name that gets a laugh in every bar between here and Owen. So, nothing. 14 days of nothing. I did keep the camera up. I pulled that card every 3 days and logged it. And it kept. And it kept. And it kept. Out between 8 and 11. In between 4:30 and 5:30. It rained twice. It froze once. It never missed, except twice. On the night of the 15th, I could not sleep, and I sat up at the kitchen table under the light until 1 in the morning. On the card, the 15th, it went out at 1:20. On the night of the 19th, I did the same thing and quit at midnight. On the card, the 19th, it went out at 12:40. Now, a man can make anything mean anything if he wants it bad enough. And I've had 9 years to talk myself out of this, and I've tried. I checked the moon. There wasn't enough on the 15th to read by. I checked the wind. There was a wind out of the northwest on the 19th. And there'd been one on the 8th. And on the 8th it went at 9:05 like always. The only thing on the 15th and the 19th that was not on the other 27 nights was a bulb burning in my kitchen window and a 60-year-old man sitting under it. It waited for me to go to bed. I have had 9 years to come up with a better explanation than that one. I have not got one. On the night of the 21st I heard it. That's the only time in the whole account I heard it make a sound, and the only time in 9 years. I'm going to do a bad job of it. I'm a beef farmer. I have not got the words, and neither has anybody else. I've heard wolves my whole life. I've laid in bed and listened to a pack work, a section line, and it never once bothered me. A wolf howl is a low, long, sad thing, and it slides. Up, down, holds. The most ordinary noise in this country. This started that way. It came out of the bog, northeast, half a mile maybe, about 11 at night, and for the first 3 seconds I rolled over. Wolf. At about the 4th second, it kept climbing. That's what I've got for you. It kept climbing past where a howl stops. It went up and got thin and got louder at the same time, which is not a thing a sound does, and by the top of it there was no dog left in it. What came out of the top was a scream. And it was not an animal screaming, and it was not a woman screaming. I have heard a rabbit in a snare, and a fisher on a roof, and a fox in February, and I know every noise this county makes in the dark. It ran about 9 seconds, and then it quit. Not trailing off. Quit. Like a switch. Sharon sat up in bed and said, "What in the hell was that?" And there it was. The whole thing, in the dark, in my own bedroom, out of my own wife's mouth, and all I had to do was open my mouth and let it out. I said, "Fisher, go back to sleep." She said, "That was no fisher." "Howard, I said, "It was a fisher. That's the worst thing I have ever done. Whatever else is in here, that one's the worst, and it is not close. I want to ask you something here, and I'd like a real answer, because I have never gotten one out of anybody I asked in person, and I have only asked 2 people in 9 years. If you had a building on your place and you knew, would you go look? Not would you shoot it? Would you walk over there at noon and put your head in the hole and look at where it sleeps? Put it down below. I read them. I've been waiting 9 years to find out if I'm the only one who wouldn't. I told you I'd get to Hazel. So here's Hazel. Hazel Brunner carried rural Route 2 out of the Withy post office for 34 years. Her husband Willard had the route and died in 53, and she took it and ran it until 87. 300 and some days a year, every gravel road in 5 townships, in a Ford, with the wheel on the wrong side. Nobody has ever known this country the way that woman knew it. Not the county, not the DNR. Nobody drives every road every day. A carrier does. And she counted the buildings, and I mean literally. When a place goes empty, a carrier closes the box, and Hazel kept the count in a plat book in her own pencil, because she was the only living person watching them go one at a time. 211 boxes on that route in 53. 68. When she hung it up. On the 22nd of October, I drove into Withy and knocked on her door. 88. Living alone on the north end of town with a walker by the chair and the television off. And she knew who I was before I got my jacket off, because she had put mail in my grandfather's hand. I drank a cup of coffee and talked about nothing for 20 minutes, because that's how it's done. Then I said, "Hazel, Did you ever have a place on that route you didn't care for? She put her cup down. She said, "Which one's yours?" That's what she said. Not, "What do you mean?" Not a laugh. She looked at me over the top of her glasses in her own front room and asked which one was mine, like a woman asking a farmer which field he's got the wet spot in. And I could not say it. I sat in that chair with the one person in Clark County who would have believed me and could not get the word out of my mouth, and I've hated myself for that for 9 years right alongside the Fisher. So I said, "The home place, the north end of it." And she said, "Oh." And then she said the thing I have never gotten out from under. She said, "I moved your box." I said, "What?" She said, "In 61. Your box was up by the house when I started. All of them were then. I moved yours out to the corner in the fall of 61, and I have never been up that driveway since. And your grandpa never said one word to me about it in 26 years. Here's what you need to know about that. My mailbox is out at the corner of the town road, 400 yards from my house, and it has been my entire life. I have walked out there in the snow 10,000 times, and never once wondered why the Wenzel box is at the road when the Colbys and the Hansens have theirs up by the porch. It was moved in 1961 by a woman who never told anybody why, for an old man who never asked. That is the entire conversation those two people ever had about it. It lasted 26 years, and neither of them said a word. I asked her how many there were. I meant the list. I figured she had. She knew what I meant. She said she never kept a list of buildings. She kept a list of stops she'd changed, boxes she moved to the road, places she flipped to run in the morning instead of the last hour of the afternoon, for a reason she could not write down. 9 in 34 years. I asked what she put on the form. Because a government outfit does not move a box, because a woman has a feeling. She said, "I wrote dog," and she looked at me and said, "They all wrote dog. What else is there to write? 9 boxes in 5 townships and a federal form under every one, and every one of them says dog. That paper is in a file somewhere in this country right now. Boxes of it, going back 100 years, and it all says dog, and there is not one word of it that is a lie." At the door, I asked the only other thing I had, which was about my grandfather. I said, "Did Emil ever say anything?" And she said, "Emil went through dogs." That's all she said. She said it the way you'd say a man went through tractors. And then, 4 of them in the years I carried. And not one got old. And I knew every dog on that route by name. And I knew when they quit coming out to meet me. And then she said the last thing she ever said to me. Because she died in March of the next year, and I did not go to the funeral, which is another thing I'm carrying. She said, "Is your yard light out?" I said no. She said, "Well, get it fixed when it goes." I drove home the long way, past the cemetery and around the section, doing 40 in a 55. And I did the arithmetic on Meg the whole way, and I have not stopped since. I bought the concrete on the 23rd of October at the Fleet Farm in Marshfield. 9 bags of the high-strength mix, 2 lengths of half-inch rebar, and a sheet of plywood I already had. The girl at the register asked if I was setting a mailbox post, and I said yes. I had my dad's mixer in the pole shed, a little tow behind with a Briggs on it that has mixed every yard of concrete that's gone onto this place since 1968. I'll tell you what I thought I was doing, and then what I was actually doing, because they are not the same, and I did not find out until I was standing there with the trowel. What I thought I was doing was fixing a building. I am a man with a trade, and the trade is that things break and you fix them. There was a hole in the base of my silo. A hole gets filled. I have poured a footing under the pole shed and patched the same stretch of driveway 4 times and never had to think about any of it. And this was a 2.5-foot hole and 9 bags and a Tuesday. What I was actually doing was writing a note. A man does not wall up a hole to keep out weather. He walls it up to keep out somebody. I had been standing in my own yard for 2 weeks working out how to say something to whatever was in that silo, and this was what I came up with, and I did not know that's what it was until it was read back to me. The 25th was a Tuesday, and Sharon was in Neilsville at her sister's from 8 in the morning. I started at 11. 11 is dead center. The notebook set out between 8 and 11 at night and in between 4:30 and 5:30. So 11 in the morning is 6 hours into its day, and 6 from the far end. If a man's going to do the stupidest thing he's ever done, he should at least do it on the schedule. I backed the mixer over and built a form out of the plywood and set it and staked it, and I did it right. I was as scared as I have ever been, and I still cut that plywood square and drove the stakes, because you cannot make a man like me do it wrong. It is not in there. Then I mixed and I started filling, and I worked for 2 hours. Here's what I noticed at about the second bag. There was nothing, not a sound. I had a Briggs & Stratton running at 18 inches from a hole with a thing asleep in it, and there was not one shift and not one breath out of it in 2 hours. And I stood there with a hoe in the mixer telling myself, well, it's asleep. Hold that up to the light. A gas engine, 4 feet away, 2 hours, at the bottom of a concrete tube 16 foot across that would ring like a barrel, and it never moved. I got to 6 bags and had that hole shut up past my belt buckle, and I stepped back to look at my work, the way you do. You always step back. You have got to see the whole building. So I looked up, and 30 foot over my head there was a door. There were 15 of them, and there have been 15 of them since 1986. A column of open square holes going up the chute face, 20 inches by 30, the last one under the roof, and I have looked at them every day since I was 30, the way you look at a doorknob. I stood in my own yard on the 25th of October with a trowel in my hand and 9 bags of concrete in a form at my knees, and I understood that I had spent 2 hours walling up a doorway on a building with 15 doors in it, and then the rest came all at once, the way it does when you've had every piece on the table for 4 months and never turned one over. 20 inches by 30. That's the door. That's what fits through. The hole in the base was never the door. It's just where the base rotted out. It goes up the inside of a 50-foot concrete tube in the dark and comes out a hole in the air 30 foot up and goes down the outside. And it has been doing that since before my father was in the ground. And that is when I finally understood how the glass got out of a yard light 22 foot up a treated pole. 22 foot is nothing. 22 foot is not even the third door. That's when the grit hit my face. Little piece of it on my cheek. And I brushed it off and looked at my hand, and it was gray. Fine gray dust. The kind that comes off the inside of a silo. The kind that has been in there since the Eisenhower administration. And then another one, falling, and I looked up at the fourth door, 30 foot in the air, in the sun, at 1 o'clock in the afternoon on a Tuesday, and there was a face in it. It was not a shape in the dark. It was 1 o'clock in the afternoon in October, blue sky, 62 degrees, and there was a head and a set of shoulders filling a 20 by 30 inch doorway 30 foot over my head, looking down at me. It did not come down. It looked at me for a good while, and then it looked at the wall. I watched it do that. I watched its head go down and to the left, off me, and onto that form full of wet concrete at the base of its house, and it looked at that a while too, and then it came back to me. You want to know the worst thing in 9 years? That's it. It read the note. Then it came out of the door. It did not use the chute. It came out into the open and went down 50 foot of concrete stave wall head first, hand over hand, back arched, head up, and it took about 4 seconds, and it was not hurrying. Down the outside of a silo, in the daylight, the way a squirrel comes down an oak, and then it was on the ground, 12 foot from me, and it stood up. It stood up beside that chute, and its head came, even with the bottom of the second door. I went back out in November with a tape, because I was not going to sleep until I did. And the bottom of the second door on my grandfather's silo is 7 foot 4 inches off the ground. 7 foot 4. And it was not standing straight. It never straightened all the way the whole time. There was more of it than that, and it did not use it. I have put a lot of animals on a scale in my life. I'd have called that thing at 350 pounds, and I'd have been low. The color of it was the color of this country in November. Gray-brown, darker down the back. Rust over the shoulders and down the outside of the arms where the sun got at it. The throat lighter, almost the color of a fawn. It was not a black thing out of a story. It was the color of dead popple bark, and it would have been invisible in that tree line at 20 foot. The head was a dog's head. I'm not going to dress it up. A dog's head made too long in the jaw and too big behind the eyes, with room in that skull for something a dog has not got. The near arm hung down past where an arm ought to stop, and the hand on the end of it had 4 fingers, and they were as long as my whole hand. And the whole thing, every inch of it, was gray, silo, dust. The coat had a color under it, and the color was going gray at the ends. And there was chaff in it. 70-year-old corn silage chaff off the floor of my grandfather's silo, hanging in the fur across its chest. I looked down at my own arms, and they were gray to the elbow, and it was the same dust, and we had both got it out of the same building. That's the thing I cannot put down. Not the size of it, not the way it came down that wall. We were dirty with the same dust. Here's how it ended, and if you're waiting for the good part, I'm sorry. It looked at the truck. The rifle was leaned up against the box of the truck, 20 foot away, and I had put it there myself because you cannot mix concrete with a rifle on your back. It looked at the truck, and it knew what was there. It looked right at the gun, and then it looked at me, and I have run that back 10,000 times, and I know exactly what happened in that second, because I have done it myself, with a bull, in a lot, more times than I can count. It was pricing me. It looked at the gun and then at the man and worked out whether either one was going to be a factor. And then it quit looking at me. That's the part that finishes you. It did not decide to let me live. It was not showing mercy, and it was not making a point. It ran the numbers on a 60-year-old man 20 foot from his rifle and decided I was not a decision. And then it went back to what it was doing. And what it was doing was going to bed. It turned and it walked. Not a charge. It walked across 120 foot of open yard in the middle of the afternoon. Past my truck, past my bale stack, out of the yard and into the pasture. And it never looked back at me once. At the fence, it did not jump. That's a 4-foot woven wire fence with 2 strands of barb on top. I put it up with my own hands. It stepped over it, like a man over a chain across a driveway. It put one leg over, and then the other one, and it did not break stride. And then it went up through the popple in the northeast corner, the corner my cows had not used since June. And the popple closed behind it, and that is the last time I ever saw it. I stood in that yard a long time after the popple closed. Then I put the trowel down on the plywood, and I walked to the house, and I never picked it up again. That form is still on the base of that silo. The plywood rotted off years ago and blew around the yard until I picked the pieces out of the fence. The concrete's there, 6 bags of it, shut up past a man's belt buckle. No float on it. The top left rough where I quit in the middle of a pass. 9 years. Half a wall. I washed my arms in the laundry tub, and the gray came off my forearms fine and would not come out of the cracks of my hands for 3 days. I sat at the kitchen table and looked at my hands about an hour. Sharon got home at 10 after 5 and asked what I'd been up to, and I said I'd been patching the silo base. She said, "Well, good. It's about time." That happened. That is what was said in my kitchen 4 hours after that thing came down a 50-foot wall headfirst in front of me. And I want it in the account because it's the most honest thing in here about what a man actually is. The next morning, the yard light was out. I came out at 5:30 to do chores, and the yard was black. And I stood on the step a second before I understood what was different about my own place. The glass was gone, not busted with a hole through it. Gone, the whole envelope, and the pieces were in the wet grass under the pole, the same as they were on the 2nd of June. That's the whole reply. Not a calf, not a fence down, nothing at the bedroom window at 3 in the morning. I wrote it a note, and it wrote me one back, and what it said was, "That's twice now, and I would like the light off. I have never put a bulb in it. 9 years, and there's a mercury vapor fixture on a treated pole between my house and my barn with no bulb in it, and a bulb in the drawer in the pole shed, still in the sleeve, that I bought in Owen in 2017. Sharon asked me about that light for 2 years. Howard, when are you getting up that pole? Howard, I can't see to get to the car. 2 years, spring and fall. And then in about 2019 she quit asking. She has never asked me about it since, not once. And I have never asked her why she quit. Hold that next to a woman who moved a mailbox in 1961 and an old man who never said a word to her about it for 26 years. And then tell me I'm any different than my grandfather. I've been trying to find the daylight between us for 9 years and there isn't any. I put the camera back up on the 11th of November. I don't know why. That's a lie. I put it up because I had to know if I'd run it off. Because in the back of my head there was still a 60-year-old man who thought he was a factor. 3 nights, nothing. I got about 11 hours of sleep out of those 3 nights, and they were the last good ones I've had. The 4th night it was back, out at 9:06 in the evening, in at 4:51 in the morning. Right in the middle of the window, it had been running since before I ever bought a camera, not 1 minute different. And I sat at that table at 7 in the morning and looked at a timestamp and understood the size of what I'd done. Nothing. I had done nothing. I built a form and mixed 9 bags and put my hands on that building and got looked at from 30 foot in the air by a thing that could have taken me apart on my own driveway. And the whole effect of my life's one act of courage was that a bulb got taken out and an animal took 3 nights off. It was not driven off and it was not warned. It slept somewhere else for a weekend the way you'd stay at your sister's while they redo your kitchen. And then it came home, because it is its home, and it has been a lot longer than it's been mine. In 2019 I found Mark Ziegler. That was 3 years after. He'd transferred out of the North office in 17 and gone to Ohio, and I am no good on a computer. And Michelle found him for me in about 4 minutes and asked me why, and I told her he was a fellow I owed money to. I got him on the phone on a Sunday afternoon in February. I said, "Mr. Ziegler, my name is Howard Wenzel. I farm northeast of Withy in Clark County, Wisconsin. You came out to my place in the fall of 2016 about a calf on a bale stack." And there was a pause. About 3 seconds. I could hear a television going somewhere behind him, and I heard him get up and walk out of the room, and a door shut. And he said, "Did you fill it in?" That's what he said. Not "who is this?" Not "I remember." Not "what calf?" A man in Ohio, 3 years later, first thing out of his mouth in the hall of his own house with the door shut. "Did you fill it in?" I said, partway. And he did not say anything for a while, long enough that I said his name into the phone. And he said, "That's what I did too." And then he said he had to go. And he hung up. And I have not tried him again, and I am not going to. There's a man out there with a federal pension and a house in Ohio and a half a wall somewhere behind him. Now I have to do Meg, because I promised you, and because it's the part I owe. Emil went through dogs. 4 in the 34 years Hazel carried that route and not one got old. My dad had a dog. Ruby. Blue heeler. Mean as a snake. And Ruby did not come to the door one morning in the summer of 1979. I was 23, and I helped him look 2 days, and we never found a thing. And my dad said she got on the blacktop, and I believed him, and he did not believe him. I had Meg for 9 years, and in November of 2014 she did not come to the door. 20 months before the calves. 22 months before I ever pointed a camera at anything. I've done that arithmetic every day since I drove home from Hazel Brunner's doing 40 and a 55. And here's where I landed. And I'm not going to try to sell it to you. A farm dog is not a pet. A farm dog is the thing that stands in the yard between the buildings and the woods and says, "I am here, and I know you are there." That's the whole job. She did it every night for 9 years. And then she didn't. And 20 months later, I lost the first calf. There has not been a dog on this place since. Sharon asks every spring. And there's always a litter of something over by Longwood. And I say, "I'm getting too old to train one." And she looks at me a second longer than she used to, and lets it go. Michelle is 24 now. She went through the tech college in Wausau and has been in an office in Marshfield 3 years and hates every day of it. And in June, she sat at that same kitchen table and told her grandpa she wants the place, the cows and the hay ground and the house and all 460 acres. And she wants to try. and she is the first person in this family in 2 generations who has wanted it, and I have not got an answer for her yet. That's what this is. This right here. I am 69 years old, and I am saying this into a microphone in a house my grandfather built. To 100,000 people I will never meet because I cannot get it out of my mouth in the direction of the one girl it belongs to. I know how that looks. I've got a reason, and it is not a good one. If all of you laugh at me, nothing happens. If she laughs at me, I've got nothing left. And that girl walks out to that barn at 4 in the morning in April with a flashlight for the next 40 years, thinking her grandpa was an old man with a story. So I'm practicing on you. That's what this is. I'm sorry, and I'm not. People ask me why I don't tear it down. $11,000 is what a fellow quoted me in 2018. I had it. I have still got it. Here's why I didn't. If I take that silo down, it does not leave the county. It does not leave the section. There are more empty buildings out here than there are people. And 134,000 acres of county forest off the back of my north line. And a bog behind that you could hide a town in. It goes somewhere else. And then I have got 460 acres and a granddaughter on them, and I do not know where it is. Right now I know where it is. That's what I've got. That's the whole estate. I have spent 9 years keeping a thing's house standing on my own place and telling my wife I'll get to it. And I am going to hand this farm to a 24-year-old girl. And the most valuable thing on it is that I can point at a building and say, there. It's in there. Right now, while we're standing here, the cows still won't use the northeast corner. Every year, along about the middle of June, they quit it. Best shade on the place. And they will stand in the sun at 91 degrees rather than walk into it. And along about the end of October, they go back in and use it all winter. I let them. They have been right about everything since before I was. I'll leave you with the only useful thing I've got, and it is not advice. My place is dark. 460 acres and 40 pair, and a house from 1931, and no light burning on it. You can see my silo from the county trunk, tallest thing for 4 miles, and if you come past at 10 o'clock at night in October, you'll see a barn and a shed and 40 cows and not one bulb lit anywhere on the outfit. There are 100 farms like that in this county. I used to drive past them and think, cheap. So if you go by a place at night with stock on it and no yard light, I am not going to tell you what that means. I'm telling you it means something. And that the man who lives there worked it out a long time ago, and that he is not going to tell you, and that you should not ask him. Ask him where his dog is. Then watch his face and count to 3. That's how you'll know. I'm going to go finish that wall one of these days. That's what I tell myself every October. 9 of them now.